Some people stop believing in kindness long before they stop searching for proof that it still exists. Inside a quiet mansion filled with expensive silence, an old man sat motionless in a leather chair. Eyes closed, breathing slow, waiting, not resting, watching. Because today wasn't about sleep. It was about truth. The boy didn't know he was being tested, and that was exactly how Arthur Sterling wanted it. Arthur had built an empire from risk and calculation, but years of wealth had taught him something darker, that trust was fragile and loyalty was often temporary. People smiled when money was involved. People promised when opportunity appeared, and too often people disappeared when there was nothing left to take. So he had learned to observe quietly, to test without announcing the test, to watch what people did when they believed no one important was looking. Outside, soft footsteps approached down the hallway. Small, careful, not the confident stride of someone who owned the space. The boy hesitated at the doorway. He looked young, younger than Arthur expected. Thin shoulders, eyes carrying more responsibility than childhood should allow. This was Elena's son, the maid, the woman who had worked in this house for years with quiet dedication. Arthur trusted her, but trust in his world always came with questions, and questions required answers. The envelope rested on the table beside him, perfectly placed, half visible, just enough to attract attention. Inside was money, more than enough to tempt anyone struggling. Arthur had positioned it deliberately. He had created moments like this before, different people, different outcomes, too many disappointments. He had watched adults fail without hesitation, watched greed replace kindness faster than he wanted to admit. Today, he expected the same. The boy stepped inside slowly. He didn't notice Arthur's slightly controlled breathing, didn't see the careful stillness behind closed eyelids. He just saw an old man who appeared asleep, in a room filled with things that didn't belong to him. He stood quietly for a moment, looking around, not curious, not greedy, just aware. Arthur waited, every second stretched. He imagined the boy noticing the envelope, imagined hesitation turning into temptation, imagined small fingers reaching slowly toward the money. Because that's how it usually happened. Not instantly, but gradually. Justification forming silently, need becoming permission. The sound he heard instead was different. Fabric moving, soft, careful. Arthur almost opened his eyes, but he didn't. He waited, listening. And then, warmth settled gently over his legs, a jacket, thin, worn, placed carefully like an offering. Arthur felt something unexpected move inside his chest. Confusion. The boy stepped back slightly, looking at Arthur with quiet concern. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a tired old man who might be cold. Arthur remained still, but everything inside him shifted. Because this was not the outcome he predicted, not the reaction he prepared himself for. And suddenly, the test no longer felt simple. The boy's gaze drifted toward the envelope. Arthur's attention sharpened instantly. Here it was, the moment, the decision. Small fingers moved closer. Hesitation lingered. Arthur held his breath, waiting for confirmation of everything he believed about the world. But instead, the boy picked up the envelope gently, turned it over, and placed it further away from Arthur's hand. Safer, protected, as if guarding it from falling. Arthur's heart pounded, not from fear, from disbelief, because kindness without audience is rare. And Arthur had just witnessed something he hadn't seen in years. He kept pretending to sleep, but now he wasn't waiting for failure. He was searching for understanding. Who was this child? Why did he move with such quiet empathy? And what else would he reveal if no one stopped him? Outside the room, Elena's footsteps approached. Time moved forward, but Arthur knew something had already changed. The test he created had just begun turning into something else. Something he didn't plan, something that would force him to question more than just the boy's character. It would force him to question his own. Arthur Sterling kept his eyes closed, but sleep was no longer part of the moment. The warmth of the boy's jacket still rested over his legs, light, worn fabric that carried no value except intention. And that was exactly what unsettled him. Because intention cannot be bought, it cannot be trained, it simply exists. Or it doesn't. He listened carefully. The boy's footsteps moved softly across the room. Not hurried, not curious in the way Arthur expected. No drawers opening, no objects shifting, just quiet movement, careful, respectful. Arthur had conducted tests like this before, too many times to count. Different people, different settings, always the same outcome. Temptation discovered, opportunity taken, excuses formed afterward. But this felt different, and he didn't know how to process that yet. The boy paused near the window. Arthur imagined him looking outside, watching the garden, waiting perhaps for his mother to finish her work. The silence stretched longer, and with every passing second, Arthur's certainty weakened, because the test was no longer confirming his beliefs, it was challenging them. Arthur's breathing remained steady, controlled, but inside, questions began forming. Who taught this child to move so gently? Who raised someone who could enter a room filled with wealth and still choose kindness over curiosity? He wasn't used to that. He wasn't prepared for that, and it bothered him more than disappointment ever had. The boy's voice broke the silence quietly. "Sir?" Soft. "Careful." Arthur didn't respond. He kept pretending. The boy waited, then spoke again. "Are you okay?" Concern, genuine. Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. Not guilt, something deeper. Recognition. The boy stepped closer. Arthur could feel the small shift in air. "Maybe he's cold," the boy whispered to himself. And that's when Arthur realized the jacket wasn't random. It was thoughtful, intentional. The boy had assessed the situation and responded with empathy, without expecting acknowledgement, without reward. Arthur remained still. But now, he was no longer observing a test. He was witnessing character, and character is far more difficult to judge than behavior. Footsteps approached in the hallway. Elena's voice echoed faintly from another room. The boy glanced toward the doorway, then back at Arthur. His gaze moved briefly toward the envelope again. Arthur felt tension return instantly. The envelope represented everything Arthur believed about human nature. Temptation, opportunity, weakness, and now, a question. Would kindness survive when money entered the picture? The boy picked up the envelope slowly. Arthur's heartbeat quickened. This was it. The moment every previous test had failed. He imagined the boy opening it, imagined eyes widening, imagined the silent decision to take just a little. Because that's how it always began. Not greed, just small rationalizations. But instead, the boy frowned slightly. He examined the envelope carefully, then turned it upright, straightened it, and moved it further away from Arthur's reach, safer, protected, as if guarding it for him. Arthur's chest tightened, because this action carried meaning beyond obedience. It showed responsibility, respect for something that wasn't his. The boy sat quietly nearby, not restless, not distracted, just present. Arthur felt something unfamiliar, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. Trust, forming slowly, and that frightened him more than disappointment ever had, because trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability had cost him too much in the past. Elena's footsteps grew louder outside. Arthur realized time was moving forward, whether he was ready or not. The test was no longer simple. The child had already shifted the emotional balance of the room, without knowing it, without trying. And Arthur understood something unsettling. The real test might no longer be about the boy. It might be about himself. He remained motionless, still pretending. But now, he wasn't waiting for failure. He was waiting for understanding. And deep down, he sensed the next moment would change everything he believed about people. Arthur Sterling had created hundreds of strategies in his life. Business strategies, negotiation strategies, investment strategies. Every decision carefully calculated, every outcome predicted. But this moment, this quiet child sitting only a few steps away, was breaking every expectation he had built over decades, and that unsettled him more than failure ever had. He listened carefully. The boy's breathing was calm, not restless, not nervous, just patient. Arthur realized something unexpected. The child wasn't acting like a guest inside someone else's home. He wasn't acting like someone surrounded by wealth. He was acting like someone who understood presence, and presence cannot be taught by money. Arthur remembered other tests, adults who entered this house, people who had smiled politely at first, people who praised him loudly, people who spoke about loyalty and trust. And yet, the moment opportunity appeared, their hands had moved quickly, not always greed, sometimes desperation, sometimes justification, but always predictable, always confirming Arthur's belief that kindness had limits. This boy was rewriting that belief. And Arthur wasn't ready for that. A faint sound broke the silence. The boy shifting in his seat. Arthur felt the small movement of air. Then a quiet voice again. "Sir?" Gentle, respectful, concerned. Arthur remained still. The boy leaned slightly closer. Not invading space, just checking. Arthur could almost feel the child's gaze searching for signs of comfort, searching for reassurance. Outside the room, Elena's footsteps echoed faintly again. Arthur realized the moment was temporary. Soon, the test would end. And yet, he found himself wanting it to continue, wanting to observe longer, wanting to understand how someone so young carried such quiet empathy. The boy stood slowly. Arthur heard soft footsteps moving toward the bookshelf, not touching anything, not exploring greedily, just looking, respecting boundaries. Arthur felt something shift deeper inside him, a realization he had resisted for years. Perhaps kindness had not disappeared from the world. Perhaps he had simply stopped recognizing it. The boy returned to the chair, sat down again, still wearing only a thin shirt after giving away his jacket. Arthur felt warmth where the fabric rested over him, and something else, a quiet discomfort, because generosity from someone with little carries more weight than generosity from someone with everything. Minutes passed. The room remained silent, but it wasn't empty silence anymore. It felt alive, filled with unspoken understanding. Arthur began questioning himself. Why had he created this test? Was he searching for proof of human failure, or secretly hoping to be proven wrong? The boy's voice broke the silence again, softer now. My mom says people should always help when they can. Arthur felt the words land deeply, not dramatic, just honest. The boy wasn't speaking to impress. He was speaking to himself, repeating something learned through life rather than theory. Arthur's mind raced. He thought about the envelope again, the money, the symbol of temptation, the tool he had used to confirm his worldview. But now, the envelope felt smaller, less important, because the real test had already been answered long before the boy touched it. Arthur realized something quietly devastating. He had spent years testing others because he stopped trusting himself, stopped trusting his own ability to believe in goodness without proof. And this child had challenged that without even knowing. Footsteps approached again outside, Elena's voice calling gently. The moment was ending. Arthur felt unexpected resistance inside him. He wasn't ready, not emotionally, not psychologically, because the transformation had already begun, and he didn't yet understand what it meant. He remained still pretending, but no longer observing from distance. Now, he was involved. And involvement meant change. Arthur Sterling felt the weight of the boy's jacket more deeply with every passing second. It wasn't heavy fabric. It wasn't expensive. But it carried something unfamiliar. Care. And care, when offered without expectation, has a way of exposing truths people spend years avoiding. The room remained quiet. But it was no longer the controlled silence Arthur preferred. It felt alive, filled with presence. The boy sat nearby, unaware of the storm building behind closed eyes. Arthur had spent decades mastering control. Control over business, control over people, control over outcomes. Yet now, he felt something slip it beyond calculation. Elena's footsteps paused just outside the doorway. Arthur could hear her voice faintly as she finished speaking to someone in the hallway. Time was moving forward. Soon the moment would end, and Arthur realized he wasn't ready. Not yet, because the test had already shifted. It was no longer about proving the boy's character. It was about confronting his own. The boy shifted slightly in his seat. Arthur heard a small shiver in the fabric of the boy's thin shirt. He had given away his only jacket without hesitation. Arthur felt a sudden discomfort rise inside him. Not guilt exactly, but awareness, the kind that forces people to examine the distance between who they believe they are and who they actually become. Arthur remembered the first time someone betrayed his trust. Years ago, a partner who smiled warmly and disappeared with millions. That moment had changed everything. He told himself he had become wiser, stronger. But in truth, he had become guarded, and guarded people often mistake caution for wisdom. The boy's voice returned softly. My mom says people shouldn't be alone when they need help. Arthur felt the words land like quiet thunder, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. The boy wasn't speaking for recognition. He wasn't expecting praise. He was simply explaining how he understood the world. Arthur realized something painful. He had created tests because he stopped believing in spontaneous kindness. He needed proof before allowing trust. But this child had offered kindness before knowing anything about him, before knowing who he was, before knowing the value of anything in this room. Arthur's breathing changed slightly. He forced it back to steady. The boy didn't notice, but internally, something shifted. The emotional distance he had built for years began cracking quietly, and cracks allow light to enter. Outside the window, sunlight moved slowly across the floor. Time continued without waiting for realization. Arthur felt urgency now. Not urgency to end the test, urgency to understand what he was feeling. Because transformation often begins before we recognize it. The boy stood again. Arthur sensed movement closer this time. Small footsteps approaching. A gentle hand adjusted the jacket slightly, making sure it covered Arthur fully. A simple gesture, but it shattered something inside him. Because it wasn't obligation, it wasn't instruction, it was instinct. And instinct reveals truth more than words ever could. Arthur felt warmth spread through him, not physical warmth, emotional, unexpected, unwelcome at first. Because warmth meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. But beneath the resistance, he felt relief. A quiet relief he hadn't experienced in years. Elena's footsteps reached the doorway. "Are you ready?" she called softly. The boy glanced toward the door. "Yes," he replied, then hesitated. He looked back at Arthur. Just for a moment, checking again, making sure the old man appeared comfortable. Arthur felt the moment stretch. He realized he had one final choice. Remain silent, end the test quietly, or reveal the truth. And for the first time, Arthur wasn't sure which choice belonged to the man he wanted to become. Arthur Sterling opened his eyes slowly, not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough for the world to shift. The boy froze, surprised, concern flashing across his face first. Not fear, not guilt, just the instinctive reaction of someone worried he had disturbed another person. Arthur looked at him quietly, really looked, for the first time without the barrier of observation, without calculation, without testing. "You gave me your jacket," Arthur said softly. The boy nodded, unsure. "You looked cold," he replied simply. No pride, no expectation of thanks, just explanation. And that simplicity felt heavier than any speech Arthur had heard in years. Arthur sat upright slowly. The jacket slipped slightly from his shoulders. He held it carefully, like something fragile. "Do you know who I am?" Arthur asked. The boy shook his head. "No, sir." Arthur nodded, and in that moment, something inside him softened completely. Because kindness offered without knowing status is the purest form. Elena stepped into the doorway. Her expression shifted instantly when she saw Arthur awake. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't realize he came inside," she said quickly. Arthur raised a hand gently. "It's all right." He turned toward her. "Your son has been keeping me company." Elena looked confused. The boy looked embarrassed. Arthur smiled faintly, and it was the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in years. He picked up the envelope from the table, held it between his fingers. "This was a test," he said quietly. Elena's face paled slightly. "I'm sorry," she began. Arthur shook his head. "No," he said softly. "There's nothing to apologize for." He looked back at the boy. "I expected you to take this." The boy's eyes widened. "I wouldn't," he said quickly. Arthur nodded. "I know." The words felt heavy, final, true. Arthur stood slowly. Age showed in his movements, not weakness, just the weight of years. He walked toward the window, thinking. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Warmer, open. "I built my life believing people always choose themselves first," Arthur said quietly. He didn't look at them as he spoke. "I tested people because I stopped believing in kindness without reward." He turned back toward the boy. "And today, you proved me wrong." The boy didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, and that honesty made the moment stronger. Arthur handed the jacket back gently. "You should keep this," he said. The boy hesitated. "But you were cold," he replied. Arthur smiled again, deeper this time. "I'm not anymore." Elena watched silently. She had worked in this house for years. She had seen Arthur serious, reserved, distant, but never like this, never open. Arthur walked toward his desk, opened a drawer, removed another envelope. Not staged, not part of a test. Real. He placed it on the table. "This is for you," he said to the boy. The child shook his head immediately. "I didn't do anything," he said. Arthur nodded slowly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." The boy looked toward his mother uncertainly. Elena hesitated. Arthur understood. "It's not charity," he said gently. "It's an investment in someone who understands something most adults forget." The boy accepted it slowly. Still unsure, still humble. And that humility changed something inside Arthur permanently. Because generosity given without expectation transforms not only the receiver, but the giver. Outside, sunlight filled the room completely now. The test had ended, but something far greater had begun. Arthur felt lighter, not because he had found proof, but because he had allowed himself to believe again. As Elena and her son prepared to leave, Arthur spoke one final time. "Kindness doesn't make people weak," he said quietly. "It reminds us who we are when nobody is watching." The boy smiled, nodded, and as the door closed behind them, Arthur sat alone again. But for the first time in years, he did not feel alone.